Hey kids, History Channel guy here. So today I'm going to be reacting to Atun Shei's new video, The Dark Deeds of Freydis Eriksdottir. I definitely butchered that name, but it's okay because I will hear the proper pronunciation soon. As you can see, it's pretty much Viking related. I usually like to review Atun Shei's Civil War stuff, but as his channel has slowly moved away from primarily Civil War content, I think that it's fair for me to react to some stuff that's not exclusively Civil War based. As always, I really enjoy making these videos, but unfortunately 95% of you are not subscribed to channels, so remember to like and subscribe if you want more reaction videos. I'm on break right now, so I'm actually being able to pump out a few videos, but here we go. Let's see what Atun Shei has in store for us today.
In the Dark Ages, Vikings in their dragon ships came howling out of the frozen north to take what was theirs with fire and blood. These were the days of hard men who would not be tamed, men who forged bloodlines to last.
See, Atun Shei, he is obviously a film, he went to film school, which means that he has a lot of experience with this stuff. But simultaneously, like, we're 25 seconds in already, I know this is terrible for the algorithm. He frankly should have just done a quick intro and gotten straight into the meat of it, but as a artist, he loves to do this sort of stuff, and frankly, this is why I love his videos, but this is why his channel isn't at 1,000,000+ subscribers. It's because he values the art of his videos over what could get quick views. And you have to find that very admirable about him that he does this, but I'll move on.
1,000 years. Strong men need a strong drink. And now you can continue the Viking tradition with new pre-mixed cosmopolitans.
That's amazing. That is a fucking great ad. Okay, good job. Good job, Anton. That is excellent.
Beyond the rocks. Brewed with premium vodka, triple sec, fresh lime, and cranberry juice as red as blood. This Leif Erikson Day, make your drink of choice pre-mixed cosmopolitans and release the beast inside you.
Wait. Go back. Is this not a sponsor for him?
Pre-mixed cosmopolitans and release.
Okay, yeah, it says please drink responsibly or don't. I don't fucking care. This isn't a real ad anyway. God damn it. Okay, well, the first minute has definitely taken me for a ride, but yeah, that was really clever, not gonna lie. And honestly, that stuff looks pretty good.
Beast inside you.
You just gonna get wasted?
Another year, another Leif Erikson Day. I hope each and every one of you, even the losers and haters, are spending this Leif Erikson Day in good health and great happiness. Today, we celebrate the virtues of curiosity, adventurousness, and good-natured bravado.
So for those who don't know, Leif Erikson Day was on October 9th, which is ironically the day before Columbus Day, or what a lot of people like to call, like, Indigenous Peoples Day. I still call it Columbus Day personally, but Leif Erikson, there's this popular movement that he was the first one to discover America, which is true, but simultaneously the Vikings didn't put the necessary institutions in place to reveal North America to the rest of the world. So Columbus might have not technically been the first European on North American soil. However, he was the one who wrote about it. He was the one who expanded it. And that's why Columbus is commemorated and Leif Erikson is not. Now, I know that it's not popular to say that, but that's the truth. Leif Erikson's colonies and the other Viking colonies failed. And there's some evidence that actually they got as far as, like, Maine. But that's debated by historians as well.
Brought the Greenland Norse to these shores in days of old. Let the spirit of the holiday imbue those virtues within you and carry them with you not just today, but every day as you embark on the great voyage of life. This year, we're going to cover one of the most dramatic and compelling episodes in the written history of the Norse exploration of North America, the fateful voyage of Freydis Eriksdottir, sister of Leif Erikson and daughter of Eric the Red. Now, this was not Freydis.
So for those who don't remember, I have a video called "The Battle of Vinland" in my Small Wars episodes, and the Battle of Vinland is technically the first battle on American soil which is recorded, but it's recorded in the Saga of Eric the Red, which is written about things that happened in the 12th century, and it was written in the 13th century. So or the 14th century, I beg your pardon. So you have these sagas that are written literally 200 years after the fact. So that's why historians question the legitimacy of some of the things that occurred in that and whether the Battle of Vinland actually happened.
His first appearance in the sagas. If you'll remember, she played a very memorable role in the saga of Eric the Red, when she and her husband accompanied Thorfinn Karlsefni's expedition of attempted colonization. The saga tells us that during a desperate battle with a Native American war party, Freydis saved the day by picking up a sword and repeatedly smacking her bare breasts with it, which apparently was enough to make the native warriors flee in terror. The saga...
I highly doubt that happened. That's probably a way to sexualize her, a way to... You have to keep in mind, there's no... God, I'm gonna get this video flag. There's no PORN at the time. So stories like this would be the only way guys could, So that story is probably where this comes from.
Eric the Red doesn't give us much information about Freydis beyond that, apart from briefly mentioning that she was illegitimate, a bastard daughter of Eric, which may or may not be true. And it makes no mention at all of Freydis.
But also at the time, one needs to remember that bastards were kind of a normal thing in society. Like, if you don't, this was prior to the Vikings being Christianized, so what was an actual marriage back then? Because in our own society, a bastard is just anyone who's born out of wedlock. But if you really think about it, there wasn't really the traditional sense of marriage back then. So what is really a bastard?
An expedition of her own. For that story, we need to turn to our other Vinland saga, written about a century earlier, the saga of the Greenlanders. The saga of the Greenlanders tells us that shortly after the return of Thorfinn Karlsefni's Vinland expedition, two brothers named Helgi and Finnbogi also arrived in Greenland. The saga tells us that Helgi and Finnbogi were from the east coast of Iceland, but beyond that, they're a bit of a mystery. Various online sources claim that the brothers were merchants by trade, but I don't know where they got that information because it's not in the saga.
So as you can see, as the years go on, you will have, wow, I paused at like the worst time for him. You will have stories start to expand. You'll have people adding it because if it's passed down orally, you'll start making stuff up to make the story seem more interesting. And it's very fascinating how that works and how you can add just random stuff to these otherwise simple stories in simple text.
It's pretty clear that these two were wealthy men of high status. They were co-captains of a ship and were pretty well traveled, having come to Greenland from Norway. And that may very well explain why Freydis decided to visit the brothers one day to persuade them to join her in an exciting new business opportunity, voyaging to Vinland in search of fame and fortune. It's easy to imagine Freydis captivating Helgi and Finnbogi with thrilling tales of the three expeditions that had gone before. There was Leif's initial voyage west, which had given the Norse world its first glimpse of the abundant natural resources of North America. Then there was her other brother Thorvald's misadventures among the strange and fearsome natives. And finally, Thorfinn Karlsefni's epic 3 years of attempted colonization.
And Karlsefni was the one in the, who had the Battle of Vinland.
The fact that those last two voyages ended in failure was very likely not a deterrent for Helgi and Finnbogi. On the contrary, in the frontier culture of the Norse North Atlantic, reputation was everything, and social standing was predicated on great feats and achievements. The more dangerous and daring, the better. Freydis and the brothers agreed.
Think about how dangerous and daring it'd be. All the other colonies have failed. You've literally basically gone to war with the natives, and you see that it's just basically the great unknown. They frankly had no idea what was there, and as one can read from old accounts from medieval Europe, they really thought the world, like, basically, they thought that there was like monsters. They thought that there was just mythological creatures in all these distant lands, and I don't blame them. They really didn't know much other than like the 50 miles around them, and a normal person would live in his village and die in his village for his whole life. But as you can see, they have a social status because they've made the trip from Iceland to Norway, or they've basically gone to Europe, and that's a very, very important task for them at the time.
Split all the profits of the voyage between them, 50-50. The saga suggests that the main resource they were after was lumber. As soon as the proverbial ink was dry, Freydis asked Leif for permission to utilize his settlement at Leifsbuther, or Leif's houses in Vinland, which may be the Lonso Meadows site in Newfoundland. Leif agreed, and Freydis and Helgi and Finnbogi set sail in 2 ships with crews of 30 men each, bound for Vinland. So let's pause the narrative here real quick. It's worth noting that what Freydis is doing here is pretty unusual for a woman in her culture. Not unheard of, but unusual. While women definitely had it better in Scandinavia and the North Atlantic than they did in contemporary insular...
So in other parts of Europe, women basically had little to no rights. Like in Russia, for instance, prior to Peter the Great, women were veiled. They were supposed to cover themselves basically their whole lives, much like you'd see in Middle Eastern countries today. So women virtually had no rights in these societies. They're never women leaders. And so a woman leading a voyage, even though this isn't Russia, but that is very unheard of. That women would not be able to do that. You don't hear about great explorers who were women back then. And frankly, like other than Amelia Earhart, you really don't hear about them at all. So yeah, that's an excellent point. Even though it wasn't as bad in Scandinavia, women still weren't given rights. But in other parts of Europe, Russia, parts of the Ottoman Empire, I guess the Byzantine Empire at this point, but the Byzantine Empire, women weren't given that great of rights.
Continental Europe, let's not forget that this is still a highly patriarchal society. Women were almost universally prohibited from leadership roles in Norse culture, and organizing a for-profit expedition was quite simply not something a woman was supposed to do. And the saga seemingly punishes her for it. We're told that Freydis was a domineering woman who wore the pants in her marriage. Her husband, Thorvard of Gardar, say that 10 times fast, was a man with great wealth who owned a prosperous farmstead, but we're told that he was a weakling, a feeble man of no consequence, and Freydis was only married to him for his money. It's also telling that even though Thorvard accompanied Freydis to Vinland and probably put up her share of the expenses, Freydis was the unquestioned captain of her ship and leader of her crew.
So isn't that interesting that despite having lots of money, despite having a lot of things to your name, you're still considered a weakling just because of the way Viking culture worked, and he's considered so weak that his wife is the undisputed captain of the ship. It's fascinating how that works.
The writer's contempt for Thorvard is a great demonstration of how rigid Norse gender roles were for men in particular. Like, this guy is wealthy, he's a landowner, he's a chieftain, but he's also kind of a wet noodle, or maybe a bit effeminate. So according to this culture, that just makes him worthless.
That's crazy.
And since Freydis is destined to play a villainous part in this story, the saga writer immediately...
Oh, so the woman's the villain because she's stepping out of the normal gender roles. Isn't that fascinating how that works?
It's a bad taste in his readers' mouths by attributing her with the traditionally masculine traits of charisma and entrepreneurship.
Nope, bad.
It was a great party. Yeah. But someone's got to do the dishes.
Let it be the wicked.
I hate that he has ads in his videos. Whatever, it's 5 seconds. Come on, get back to it.
Now, the Icelandic sagas as a whole are full of female characters who fight duels or lead armies or otherwise challenge the mores of their gender. And the story doesn't present this as a bad thing. In fact, the authors of those sagas often seem to celebrate them for it. But we should distinguish between the reality of Viking Age Norse culture on one hand and the later literary tradition of Icelandic saga writing on the other. And we should further distinguish between the highly mythological and fantastical sagas, told and retold primarily as a form of entertainment, and the more realistic, plausible sagas intended as familial and cultural histories. The 13th century saga of Hervor and Heydrich, for example, revels in the exploits of its female lead as she disguises herself as a man to go on adventures as a warrior. But the saga of Hervor and Heydrich also has magic swords, and barrow wights, and Tolkien-esque dwarves. Odin shows...
Isn't that cool? I guess cool's not the right word, but isn't that fascinating that they would have basically mythological creatures in these accounts? Like in Marco Polo, he has some crazy crazy claims. Like, he sees like unicorns and stuff, which are obviously just rhinos now that we know the rest of the world. But this would spread misinformation throughout the world, because you'd hear these accounts of like, oh, little dwarves and their little societies in the mines, or you'd hear about in Africa, for instance, there would be all these just mythological creatures, and they're really just like lions and elephants. But it's just fascinating how you see fantasy crop up in these sagas, when in reality they probably just saw a little person and they assumed it was like a society of dwarves or something like that. I don't know. I find that very, very fascinating personally.
At one point, there's all sorts of crazy shit. Whereas the saga of the Greenlanders is about a family who goes sailing. It was written early in the saga age.
Doesn't sound as fun when he puts it like that.
A lot of fantasy tropes started entering the genre. And furthermore, some of it is corroborated by archaeological evidence in Newfoundland and Greenland. So, in my inexpert opinion, admittedly, Saga of the Greenlanders probably reflects Viking Age gender roles a little more accurately than those later sagas. But that's not the only possibility. The guy who wrote Saga of the Greenlanders might have just been a huge misogynist, and his personal bias is clouding everything. Who fucking knows? Now, if you know much about Viking stuff, you're probably shouting at the screen, what about the Burka shield maiden? And
of course.
Archaeologists did find a Viking Age warrior with 2 X chromosomes buried in an honored location in an exceptionally elaborate grave filled with weapons, horses, and all the trappings of command in the east of Sweden. This may indicate that biological females could exhibit a range of gender expressions in Norse culture, and further excavations in the future may prove that beyond a reasonable doubt. But I'm skeptical. There are just too many unknowns and alternate possibilities. It could very well be an isolated case of one extraordinary individual. Or, since many of the grave goods are associated with the warrior elite of the Eurasian steppes, this gender expression may indicate a Russian cultural influence.
It's fascinating that he says Russian, because there are some stories in Russian culture about women taking leadership roles despite the Eastern Orthodox Christian values which women were supposed to uphold at the time. So, for instance, Olga is considered to be one of the founders, well, not really founders, but one of the early leaders of Russia when it was Kievan Rus. And basically, Olga was the leader of Russia at the time in the Kievan Rus day. So it would see that they would have an honored tradition. It's also fascinating that many, I guess, pseudo-historians think that women in Viking culture had almost equal rights to men, and they're fighting with them on the front lines. And I think that this is just one unique case. I don't think that there are going to be hundreds of thousands of women fighting in the Viking armies, helping the Vikings out. It just doesn't seem like a logical thing to me, given the contemporary history that we have at the time, which basically put women in the traditional role that you would see women in the Middle Ages. But this case certainly goes against that, but I frankly think that this was just a 1 in a million sort of case when it came to women fighting in the Viking army. You didn't have Eowyn, who's from Lord of the Rings, fighting in every Viking army and doing Viking raids.
Than an indigenous Norse one. Or, as some academics have suggested, this person might have been what we would classify today as transgender. And if
I'm going to say that that's not true either. Transgenderism is something that basically has basically just popped up in the past 15 years, and it seems like these are the type of quote-unquote historians who want this to be true, that there's transgenders throughout human history, and which is just, that's nonsense. That's not a thing. It might have just been a very masculine woman, which I think is a lot more logical than a transgender.
Taken on a man's social role, then as a warrior, they were actually reinforcing gender roles, not subverting them. Now, don't mistake me here. I'm not saying that Freydis's girl boss ways are the reason she's determined to prove a villain. In fact, it's the least of her villainy. But for this culture, it's still weird and off-putting. It's like Homelander doing that creepy thing with the milk.
The fuck?
It's there to tell you, as an audience member, that there's something off about this person, that you've got to watch out for them. I think that little detail about her being domineering and ambitious, especially in the context of her marriage to an inadequate man, is there for a reason. After all, it's the very first thing the saga writer tells us about her. And as the two ships of Freydis and Helgi and Finnbogi neared the coast of Vinland, the saga reveals that Freydis was not only greedy and perversely masculine, but deceitful.
Do you think he's actually drank that much during this? That'd be kind of crazy. Respect, Anton.
And unscrupulous as well. Before setting sail, she had agreed with the brothers that they would bring crews of 30 men in each of their ships. But Freydis hired 5 more men behind their back, which Helgi and Finnbogi didn't discover until after they had gotten to Vinland. Furthermore, upon their arrival at Leifsbuther, Freydis insisted that Leif had lent the settlement to her, not to the brothers, and forced their crew to build their own shelter some distance inland. So right off the bat...
It's a dick move. Especially in the cold, wet, awful, snowy regions. Even in the summer, it gets fucking cold. Of Greenland and Newfoundland, I could not imagine that. Like, for instance, this summer we flew over Canada. I was flying from Spain, and we flew over Canada over Newfoundland, and there was still ice caps everywhere. This is the July. It's insane how cold it is and how the weather basically just never gets warm in that area. So imagine being an explorer and you have to build a settlement as quick as you can or you're going to freeze to death.
Freydis is just a nightmare of a business partner, and the crews of the two ships are physically separated in different dwellings. The battle lines are being drawn for a coming conflict. But, to their credit, Helgi and Finnbogi repeatedly tried to ameliorate the situation. As the long North Atlantic winter set in and work ground to a halt, the brothers suggested that the two crews meet for games and other entertainments to help pass the time. Freydis initially agreed, but the saga tells us that it wasn't long before trouble broke out at one of these gatherings. What kind of trouble, we don't know, but it's easy to imagine that given the way Freydis mistreated Helgi and Finnbogi's crew, the atmosphere at these game nights was probably pretty tense, with a lot of feigned politeness and unspoken antagonism.
Yeah, you see this a lot in Game of Thrones, where they throw like petty comments at each other, and those are the best Game of Thrones dialogue, is when it comes from just characters just talking and throwing shade at each other. Right now, spoilers for House of the Dragon, I guess. Rhaenyra's kids are bastards, and Queen Alicent is just doing so much stuff to just throw shade at the kids. And when her new son Joffrey was born, she looks at Sir Laenor, who's Rhaenyra's gay husband, and says, "Better luck next time, Sir Laenor. Maybe the next one will look more like you." Basically implying, like, yeah, we know that these aren't your kids, and these are Lair Strong's kids. Sorry, I'm a big Game of Thrones nerd. I just went off of a tangent, but yeah, you see this sort of stuff all the time in medieval society, because you always have the expectation that you're supposed to be polite and that you're supposed to show courtesy to everyone, but simultaneously the courtesy can be some of the best burns in the world, because they're being polite, but they're also just completely roasting each other.
Competition may have gotten ugly as tensions between the two parties bubbled over, leading to crew members coming to blows, or maybe even drawing knives. Whatever happened, it was egregious enough that all visiting between the two settlements ceased for the rest of the winter. Then, one day, some months later, Freydis got up early in the morning and put on her husband Thorvard's cloak. Symbolism much, but did not put on any shoes, and walked barefoot to Helgi.
She's the man now, yeah, symbolism. He basically explained that. Y'all can connect the dots. I don't need to explain that to you.
Finnbogi's encampment. She found Finnbogi already awake and bade him come outside to talk. Probably to Finnbogi's great surprise, Freydis expressed regret for the part she had played in the ill feeling between them, and announced her intention to return to Greenland. To that end, she proposed switching ships with the brothers, since theirs was bigger, so she and her larger crew could sail home in greater comfort. Finnbogi agreed and must have felt a huge weight lifted as he went back to bed. Finally, the brothers would be free of their psycho business partner. But Freydis had other plans. She returned home and climbed into bed with Thorvard, who woke with a start as soon as he felt her ice-cold feet brush up against him. He asked why Freydis was so cold and wet. She replied that she had gone to visit Helgi and Finnbogi to ask to buy their ship, but they had gotten angry and beat her and treated her very roughly. Freydis called Thorvard a coward and insisted that if he didn't avenge this insult, she would divorce him. Again, as strict as female gender roles probably were for Norse women, Norse men had it 1,000 times worse. And with Thorvard here, we see a man imprisoned by societal expectations of masculinity. Now, we might think it's a universal constant for someone to want to avenge violence done to their loved ones. And yeah, that's absolutely true. But in the Norse cultural context, Thorvard literally has no choice but to go in guns blazing. Like, you'd think at this point it would be smart to take a beat and think, okay, maybe I should get to the bottom of this before I start swinging a sword around. Besides, Freydis has been untruthful and erratic this whole voyage, whereas Helgi and Finnbogi have been very measured and reasonable. But whether the beating happened or not is irrelevant in this situation. Norse men attacked the wives, sisters, and mothers of other men in order to dishonor them. In an attack like this, or even a sexual assault, the men were understood to be the intended victims of the violence. So by humiliating Freydis, the brothers are posing a direct challenge to Thorvard. And maybe if this had happened to Leif or Karlsef.
Okay, I have no idea what's going on. I basically, the woman's being a bitch. Lack of better term.
Confidently masculine Norse elites, then they would have paused to investigate the accusation or formed a sneaky plan to serve their revenge up cold. But Thorvard cannot afford to do that. He's already viewed as weak and effeminate by his culture and community. Saving face and maintaining honor as a man is his first priority here. The truth of the accusation a distant second. Thorvard's inability to live up to the standards of masculinity of his culture is his defining trait, and it's what drove him to swift and brutal violence. So Thorvard woke his men and armed up, and went straight to Helgi and Finnbogi's houses. They broke in while the brothers' crew was still sleeping, tied them up, and hauled them outside. There, Thorvard killed Helgi and Finnbogi, along with all their men.
Wow.
There were 5 women with the brothers' crew.
Not so weak after all, is he? Take that. Yeah, that's all I have to say.
And Freydis insisted that they be put to death as well. But this was a bridge too far for Thorvard.
So yeah, I frankly have never heard this before, so it's hard for me to add historical context, and I'm basically just listening to the story like y'all are at this point. When something historical props up, I will definitely comment on it, but right now we're just seeing a lot of... Actually, no, we do... I feel like I see this trend of sneaking in and the vengeance sort of thing. Like, you see this in Greek mythology a lot. You see this in mythology throughout the world. So it's kind of interesting that this has the same traits as the Greek myths that I've read basically my whole life.
He had avenged his honor and then some, and just wanted the bloodshed to end. So Freydis took up an axe and hacked all the women to death herself.
Oh my god.
After she killed the women, Freydis led Thorvard and her crew back to Leifsbuther.
Well, that is very Viking-esque. Basically slaughtering the women, enslaving them when doing raids. That was actually a big issue in Great Britain, because there would be Viking raiders who would enslave the women and basically take them back to Iceland or Norway, basically Scandinavia, and that was because there was a lack of women in that area, and the only way to further the line was to basically enslave women. So that there you go. That's a very terrible practice. But if you look at the genetics of some of the modern day inhabitants of Sweden, Norway, Denmark, etc., you notice that they have a lot of Norman genes. They basically have the same genetics as people from England, and that's because of the enslavement that the Vikings did to the people of Great Britain and the Isles there.
Told them she'd kill anyone who breathed a word of what had happened.
Wow.
The story they tell people in Greenland was
this is actually crazy. Like, this is this woman is batshit, basically, that, for lack of a better term. I've never heard of a story of a woman like this, but it's very fascinating that she's the villain of the story. But in a lot of ways, it's kind of hilarious that people would see her as like empowering now. I don't know. I find that interesting that the role of the woman has changed so much that women villains are seen as different now.
Helgi and Finnbogi had decided to stay behind. But upon their return with a ship laden with goods, word of the murder spread anyway, and eventually reached Leif, who was horrified. He seized and tortured 3 of Freydis' men to get to the bottom of it, and found that their stories matched exactly. Leif decided to show mercy on his sister, and allowed Freydis to live in peace with Thorvard at their farm at Gardar. But a dark cloud would hang over their...
Does she really deserve that, though? Come on, you just killed a bunch of innocent people, and you have to show some sort of punishment. That's kind of crazy that she got away with it, personally. But whatever. It's Leif Erikson. Can't really... I guess maybe kinslaying was an issue at the time, but I don't know. That seems a little odd to me that she would just get off scot-free and would just be living in exile at her farm with her weak husband. She certainly wears the pants of that family, though.
For generations. Sadly, we will probably never know how true this episode of Saga of the Greenlanders is to the real events of Freydis Eriksdottir's voyage to Vinland. But true or not, it's a thrilling story of honor, adventure, and murder, with deeply flawed and compelling characters worthy of a great Shakespearean tragedy. So, believe it or not, this is our 4th Leif Erikson Day special here at Atun Shei.
Real, I did not know that. I did not know that he did multiple Leif Erikson Day stuff. I guess I just been focusing on Checkmate Lincolnites way too much that I didn't explore his other stuff. He has some funny videos when it comes to the people who used to rule Germany, but yeah, that's funny. That's crazy. I also like his Q&As. If y'all want a Q&A, please let me know. I'll definitely do a Q&A and record it for y'all. But yeah, let's continue.
And at this point, we've covered all of the Norse voyages to America as related in the Vinland sagas.
Interesting.
But that, my friends, is only the beginning. There are tons of other aspects of the Norse exploration of North America to cover, from archaeology to historiography to cultural legacy, from stories of Norse Inuit conflict in Greenland in the High Middle Ages to deep dives in...
Yeah, and that's what we covered in the Battle of Finland. Check that video out. I'll leave it in the description.
Lives of the 11th century native peoples that the Eriksons may have met in their adventures. The possibilities are endless. But I guess we shall have to just wait and see what the future may bring. For now, it's time to say goodbye. This year, I want all you boys to drink Cosmopolitans and practice satyr magic. What, satyr?
Dude, he totally killed that bottle. Look at that. My God. He might be drunk in this video.
Magic's too girly for you? Tell that to fucking Odin. Skull.
Yes, one touch. One touch. No! You little bitch. Come on. You had to finish that. Come on, Anton. No, drink more. What are you doing? Okay, well, that's it. That's Atun Shei's, I guess this is Leif Erikson special. What did y'all think? If you like this video and you want me to react to more Atun Shei videos, remember to like and subscribe, and comment what video you want me to react to. Thanks, guys. Have a